Next, very important information. We're going to get a special presentation from Gretchen Hunt with our Office of Equity. And this is about this January. This month is Stalking Awareness Month. And so we're going to have a discussion about domestic violence in our community. Gretchen, why don't you go ahead and share your presentation and take it away.
Thank you, David. Let me hold on one quick second, you all. I know folks are off camera, but I know it's so much better to get to see faces. So if anybody is open to doing that, this is a really important topic. Feel free to not have your face. I know you are really busy folks. I know some of the names as I looked at the list of the 140 or 150 people, but there are a lot of folks that I don't know. And what I want to say to all of you is that I want to be a resource across Metro government. I'm in the Office of Women. I lead that office. It's an office of one, small but mighty, and very dedicated to this issue, and want to be a resource from this point on. So please do reach out and contact me if you have any questions after this. And of course, since every setting, there are survivors in every room, if you have specific questions after this, feel free to reach out to me via email, and I'll drop that information in the chat if you have any questions. That's usually the #1 call we get here at the Office for Women are calls from community members, fellow Metro employees, different folks who call asking about domestic violence or other topics. So I have about 20 minutes with you all here. Be where your feet are. I know you have lots of things, but this is really, really critical information that impacts so many of us, men, women, gender diverse individuals working across government. And so if you have not been touched by domestic violence or gender-based violence in your life, that's great, but most of us have a direct connection of someone close to us or a lived experience just because of the prevalence. So this is really, really critical information for our workplaces. So today, like I said, I just have a little bit of time with you all. Before I begin, I do want to educate you all. How many folks know about the Office for Women? A lot of folks don't know we have an Office for Women in Louisville Metro, but we have been in place since 1991. And our goal is to advance the status of women through education, advocacy, and legislation. And we have 7 areas of focus as we try to raise the status of women and promote gender equity. And those also include gender-based violence. So thank you, Deanne. I saw that you're with me and you're preserving bandwidth. I certainly respect that. So we have a large mission at the Office for Women. And one of the things I do want to say is that all these areas help to, can help to prevent gender-based violence as well. So when you look at things like housing and social and economic well-being, we know that all the efforts that you all are doing across government, whether you're in ocean or you are in community resiliency or you're in economic development or you're in parks, you are doing things every day that help build up protective factors that prevent violence. So a lot of us do this work, not just the Office for Women. So real quickly, as we talk about gender-based violence, I want to just define that term. Gender-based violence, as I am talking about it and as that's referred to kind of internationally, really refers to those interpersonal crimes that tend to be committed more against women and gender minorities, although they can impact men and all different folks in our community. But we're talking about things like intimate partner violence or domestic violence, which can be emotional, verbal, physical, sexual, economic abuse. We're talking about dating violence, things like revenge porn, when people use technology or try to slander people in their workplace. Stalking, as David mentioned, January is Stalking Awareness Month. We're going to have a press conference with the mayor and partners on Thursday, so stay tuned for that. Also sexual violence, human trafficking, and femicide, or the killing of women. And the really alarming thing is that in the state of Kentucky, as in many places across the nation, nearly 1 in 3 women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. 1 in 3. I have never not worked with coworkers, people that are colleagues, whether I'm an attorney by training, whether with judges, police officers. I've never not been in a setting where there's been survivors. This crosses all economic lines, all racial lines. It's a very prevalent issue. Nearly 1 in 2 women in Kentucky will experience sexual violence, and nearly 1 in 4, which is the highest rate in the nation, will experience stalking. And stalking is highly correlated with lethality risk for domestic violence. So 3/4 of women who were killed by an intimate partner had been stalked in the year prior. So it's a major risk factor for domestic violence homicide. It's worth noting that for communities that are marginalized by other discrimination, so by racism, by homophobia, transphobia, anti-disability measures, all of those things further isolate communities and make them more vulnerable to all of these crimes and less likely to seek help. And in our state, really one alarming thing that should really call our attention to it is that Black women in particular in our state and our city are experiencing a higher rate of domestic violence homicide. And so there's a particular urgency that we have in our community in general to really get at these issues early on. Here's a little bit about, if you've never seen it, a valuable tool which is called the Wheel of Power and Control. And the Wheel of Power and Control is a valuable tool for understanding one of the topics we're going to talk about today, which is domestic violence. And so by show of hands or in the chat, has anybody seen the Wheel of Power and Control? If not, this is a good resource for you just to better understand domestic violence, because it's never just one incident, it's a pattern of behavior. And what is so damaging to a lot of survivors is that it's this repeated, constant wearing down of a person and this threat and this control. And I've accompanied hundreds of survivors in my career. I've spent over 22 years in this work. And many of them would actually say that a lot of the emotional abuse and control was much more harmful than the physical. And so I say that just to say that, as we talk about domestic violence and crimes today, it's really worth noting that we need to listen to survivors in terms of what their experience of harm has been. And it may not be what we think is the most harmful or dangerous thing. In other words, they're the ones who are the experts in their story. And this helps you understand a little bit of how that person is in the middle of that storm. So the impact of gender-based violence in the workplace, the reason why we're talking about it today is because it impacts folks in the workplace. So if you are experiencing domestic violence or other types of gender-based violence, you're more likely to be highly traumatized, have more sick days, have more absenteeism. It's amazing because survivors come to work and they keep going in spite of this, but they may have experienced abuse all that night before and then come in and work in the morning, but it still leaves an impact. And this results in harms to our community. It results in 8 million days of lost work. There's a lot of turnover, unemployment, and the other thing that happens is if it adversely impacts your workplace, survivors are sometimes forced to quit jobs or sometimes are fired from jobs because they haven't been able to disclose what's going on. And so it just looks like poor work performance. And then that makes them more vulnerable to not being able to escape the violence. So from a societal standpoint, work is where we spend the most of our time. It's incredibly important for the whole well-being of the whole society. So we really do want to talk about these issues in the workplace. Now, a lot of times people think, well, I don't want to talk about personal business. So I'm going to talk to you about, why we do this. One of the reasons why is when we want to address things like public safety, like domestic violence homicides, which is a major focus of Mayor Greenberg, we don't want to just address them after they happen. We just don't want police to be the only ones. We want to go back upstream and figure out how can we change our culture so that this kind of violence doesn't happen. And so people know that there are safe places where you can come forward early and get assistance, early and find out what support you have. Bishop Desmond Tutu had this great quote about, if people keep falling in a river, don't just keep rescuing them. Go upstream and figure out what's going on. So the research that our partners in, I want to do a shout out to the Office of Health Equity, which understands this model a lot. But when you're talking about preventing something like a domestic violence murder, actually having things in the workplace, policies in the workplace actually help to prevent that. And a lot of people wouldn't think that. They think it just is more policing or more arrests or more jail time. But in fact, if you're creating these policies in the workplace and these interventions and these trainings, you all can sometimes do much more than a whole criminal justice system can do. no pressure, but it is something that you can do. And I want you all to feel empowered to be able to prevent violence, because the research really shows that these things, policies, training, awareness, work. So what I'm going to talk about briefly today is really zeroing in on some responses to domestic violence that are helpful, and then talk about the new crime victim leave policy that we have in place here at Metro. First of all, it's really important to know your role, right? Everything in life is stay in your lane, understand what you're good at, understand where you need to delegate it. We are all team members. I am not a math person. I am not a tech person. I deal with collaboration and people and laws, and I'm good at that. But there are other great folks in IT and in OMB who handled those other pieces for me, right? Similarly, when you're talking about domestic violence in the workplace, remember, we are not asking you as an HR rep or as a colleague or any other role to be a therapist or to be an investigator. Now, the HR investigators, that's a separate thing, but for the rest of you, we're not asking you to take on these different roles that are outside your area of expertise. We're not asking you to fix the situation, right? Here's what I am suggesting that you consider: that you play a powerful role in being a HR rep who helps to represent policies and resources to your department. And you also are a valuable coworker who has a relationship with other coworkers. And so you can do things that are universally helpful to someone who's in a domestic violence situation. The first thing, listen. Keep an open ear and be attuned if someone is dropping hints. And people will. Survivors will often kind of scope out, is this a safe place for me to disclose what's happening in the workplace, right? So pay attention to that. And if someone says something like, yeah, I'm just not comfortable, my boyfriend or my girlfriend keeps texting me, sometimes it's really appropriate. They've opened it up and say, gosh, that sounds terrible. What's going on? Are you safe? Right? Simple things to just reflect back that listening. Believe what is going on. I will tell you that oftentimes it's very incredible, hard to believe that people sometimes who might seem like great folks do commit acts of violence. So you might from the outside look at a couple and think they're great. You don't know what's going on in that relationship. My favorite teacher shot himself and shot his wife when I was 15. Totally blew us all away. We didn't know, but he was a great teacher, kind, supportive in the workplace, and he was going home and beating his wife, right? So to believe that person, not to judge, not to investigate, right? It is fine to express your concern for someone's safety and say, gosh, you've just told me about this situation with your ex-boyfriend who you've moved away from, and he keeps calling you, and he showed up at the workplace. I'm concerned about your safety. It is fine to say that. That is not a judgment thing. That is expressing concern. So listening, believing, expressing concern for safety. And then the most critical thing is offering resources. We'll talk about two forms of resources today. One is area community resources for victims. And the second is the specific leave for victims of domestic violence and other crimes that we'll talk about. Remember, the most important thing I want to import to you all is that it is very dangerous, in fact, to ever try to step in the role of someone who has survived domestic violence, is in that situation, and make a decision for them. If it were as easy as saying, I'm going to leave this relationship and be done, tell them I'm done, tell her I'm done, many people would be able to escape. Escape is not that easy. In fact, the highest rate of lethality happens. The most domestic violence homicides happen when a survivor tries to escape. That is the most dangerous time. So while it may seem that the best thing to tell somebody is you need to get out of this situation, you need to leave, in fact, you could be putting them in more harm. Survivors are smart. They've survived up to this point. They may have made decisions that don't make sense to you, but if they are standing in front of you still alive, they have known what has kept them alive. And it may be things that don't seem intuitive to you. So the most important thing is to get that person access to resources, what I like to say is a lifeline, so that they can be getting support. And so if leaving is the right decision for them, they're building up those protective factors, right? And they're maintaining employment, which is a protective factor. So I just want to really reiterate that while it's really normal to want to say, gosh, I care about you, I'm worried about you, I want you to leave, not a helpful thing. Quick checked in on time with Ernestine and David. Am I about 10 minutes in? Anybody want to give me a time check? Because I forgot my timer.
Oh, you're good.
Looking good.
All right. And I can't really see the chat, but if anybody does have questions, feel free to pipe in. I want to just briefly just see if there's any questions right now. Okay.
I'll monitor that for you, Gretchen.
Did you say, sorry, I couldn't hear you, David. What did you say?
I said I'll monitor the chat for you.
Perfect. Thank you. It's good to have tag team here. So the really great thing is that there has been work all over the country to try to create policies in workplaces to accommodate survivors. And the reason I say that's a great thing is that, you know, having a stable employment, having your own independent source of income is a big protective factor. And so workplaces are a lifeline for survivors of domestic violence and other crimes because they keep them more independent and they keep them connected to more people. So it's a really, really important connection to make. And often domestic violence disrupts that. Stalking disrupts that, right? The abuser often wants to isolate that victim from any connection. So they'll often try to sabotage the workplace. They'll try to separate them because they know that that person is connected and can get outside information. So it's been a good movement that many places and workplaces have tried to create policies to provide leave and other protections for victims. The reason this is also a win-win for employers is that if you have a great employee, they're in a domestic violence situation, they know that early on they can talk about what's going on, they can get the time that they need to go get a protective order, go get therapy, get the support they need. You're more likely to keep a good employee employed. And so we know that we save in the long run, right? We save lives, but we also save income by not having to retrain people and rehire and have a revolving door. So you keep good workers in the workplace. So in last spring, Metro Council passed a leave ordinance, Ordinance 53-2022, and it allows victims of domestic violence and other crimes to take 7 days paid leave if they are Louisville Metro government employees. Metro Council should still do it for themselves, but this covers Louisville Metro government. It also, when you talk about who is named as the victim, it tracks Kentucky's law on victims, which means, for example, that if someone had their son killed in a shooting, they would still be considered the victim for purposes of this ordinance and be able to take the time. If that leave is exhausted, so you can imagine the situation, say there was a stalking case or a strangulation case where someone had severe injuries and they had to be in the hospital for 2 weeks or in recovery, or they had to flee the state, or they had to participate in a 3-week trial, a felony trial, for example. If they go past that 7 days, they can do up to 30 days unpaid leave. The reason this is really important is that most policies in the workplace focus on whom? Can we think about what policies? They usually tell us what not to do, right? Which is really, really important. I'm not training you today on don't be domestic violence abuser at work, don't use your phone to stalk your partner. I'm not training you on that today. That's a separate and important training. What we're training today is focusing on the survivor. Because the thing that matters is, one, it's a concrete benefit to the survivor. Two, speaking to the survivor also sends a powerful messages to abusers in the workplace that this is a workplace that surrounds and supports victims. And it's a deterrent to other actions. So that's why also the leave policy is really, really an important message speaking to survivors. Leave, being able to access this paid leave, starts when you start Louisville Metro government. So say you just started and you haven't accrued time, but a violent incident occurs, a crime occurs, you need to take the leave, you can access it. Now, here's, you can seek this leave for these purposes. So if you've been a victim, say, for 20 years, and you now say, I really need to take this time, you do still have to have a nexus as to why you're taking the time. So you can take the leave to seek medical attention, to get services from a victim service agency like the Center for Women and Families here in Louisville that also serves men and non-binary folks, not just women and families. But go to a victim service agency to get counseling, to get advocacy, to do safety planning. You can get psychological or other counseling. Say you're getting counseling at your faith community and it's a nexus to this crime, you can do that. To temporarily or permanently relocate. That is a real issue if somebody is not safe. We see this a lot, unfortunately, lately with homicide survivors who have to relocate. Maybe it was a gang-involved shooting and they have to get out of Louisville for a while. You can use the leave to take legal action, including, prepping for a protective order hearing or a criminal case resulting from that crime. And then there's sort of a catch-all that says take any other action to meet needs reasonably resulting from domestic violence or crime. So what might that be? Well, one thing might be your door's been busted in, you have to get your locks changed, your abuser has been harassing your child at school, so you have to register that child for another school. So there could be case-specific things that a survivor needs to do. And today we're not going to be talking as much about the logistics. I'm going to defer to my colleagues and experts, Director Booth and her team at HR, who are going to talk more about the logistics of this. What I wanted to highlight for you all is, just that this ordinance exists and just a few key points. Some of those also include that this has to remain confidential. If you think about it, think about how hard it is to actually talk about domestic violence or other experiences of crime in the workplace. You are your work self, you are presenting yourself to your colleagues. It could be really hard to admit that these things are going on, especially I think about those of you who work in areas of government where you are the helper. And so suddenly, if you are the one who needs help, it can be really, really hard. And so when that survivor has trusted and confided in the HR rep, in their supervisor, in a trusted colleague, what the ordinance says is we need to keep that confidential. And Louisville Metro government will keep that confidential unless the disclosure is required by law. For example, if it was about abuse of a child that needed to be reported, that would need to be reported. But otherwise, we safeguard that. We understand that, this is not, maybe they're telling this immediate person what's going on. Other people don't need to know that business. And we can't use that information to discriminate against the employee. Really, really critical, because sometimes survivors do get penalized. We see that sometimes in housing situations, that survivors of domestic violence might get evicted, even though it's counter to some federal laws, because the abuser keeps showing up. So we are launching an awareness campaign on Thursday. You will see this announced by Mayor Greenberg, and you will see this information come out in your areas. I am getting lots of copies of these posters, and we have a few versions. You'll see that we tried to be representative of different couples, recognizing that this impacts straight couples, queer couples, Black, brown, white, Asian folks, Latinx folks, that we know that violence crosses all those boundaries, and we wanted people to be able to see themselves in terms of getting support. So this is just some signage that you will see. We also have some pocket cards, so we'll have those. So if you are an HR rep and you're not, maybe you're in, I don't know, planning, development, tech, you're really not a people person in terms of wanting to get into these conversations, that's okay. And I shouldn't stereotype those areas. I'm just thinking about all the different rich diversity of folks we have in Metro. Maybe you're not so comfortable talking about just what we said, the listen, the believe, the offer support, but you have this card and you share it with somebody. That's a powerful thing that you could do. You've let them know about resources. So we're hoping to give all members of the Louisville Metro family information that you can use and share with individuals. Mayor Greenberg talks often about the value of hospitality, that applies both in how we serve the public, but also how we treat one another. And so I think of this too as treating one another with respect and care. And one of those ways we do that with our colleagues is to let people know that resources exist. So you'll see on these flyers, there's some resources for local domestic violence programs, national sexual assault hotline, some other resources. Key takeaways today. So to sum this up, it is incumbent on all of us to let people know that resources exist, that they are not alone. It is up to all of us to encourage a culture of respect, safety, and access. And by access, I mean that people just know where to go to get this support, to share the information about crime victim leave. And if you notice something's going on with somebody, listen, believe, don't judge, offer resources, repeat. What I would like to say and what I would like to see across government, and as we're going to continue to roll out more training and more awareness, is that this just becomes the norm, that we just know this information is out there. We know all the posters about COVID. We know that we are able to disseminate information to people to keep people safe. And I would like to see the same for this, so that we reduce some of the stigma of survivors who are in the workplace, because there are survivors everywhere, and we increase the protective factors. And then we're a model really for workplaces across Louisville. So that's all I have right now. This PowerPoint presentation will be provided to you all. And I just wanted to open it back up. I think I'm probably out of time, but if there are any questions, comments, reactions, anything else, and I'll drop my information in the chat.